Hello, this is Jessie Rodriguez Melendez from All Bases Covered, and welcome to Spanglish World Networks on Zingo TV channels 249, 250, and 251. Please remember to download both the Zingo TV app on the respective app stores on iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. The app is free. Zingo TV is also available on all Google Chromecasts, Amazon Fire and Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, also on all smart TVs 2016 and forward. Welcome to this week's edition of All Bases Covered. This is a really special one because it's also my birthday. I am celebrating my 51st year alive, and I'm so blessed to have a super special guest because this is a woman that is really working hard to bring awareness about the brain. And she is part of someone who I truly admire. He's my mentor. He's someone that I'm certified under as a brain trainer. And for those of you that are not familiar with my backstory, my name is Jessie Rodriguez Melendez. I am the proud owner of the Sports Business Institute. And our show here is all about sports business, how to build, grow, scale your business. And part of that is understanding how to be a phenomenal business owner, how to understand how to take really good care of, for us, it's going to be our athletes and the families that we serve. And part of that is understanding ourselves, understanding our bodies, understand how to optimize, how to teach our athletes how to optimize their, potential. And so tonight joining me is going to be the person that's responsible for taking care of all of the back end of what's happening with the brain training certification with Dr. Amen. And so please help me welcome Barbie Gustavo. I want to make sure I'm saying that right. Gustavson. Barbie, please welcome her to the show. Barbie, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I am so super excited about having you on because for besides talking about sports business, one of the things that fascinates me and that I absolutely love to talk about is the brain. And that's why when I encountered Dr. Amen's program, I was just so blessed by it. It came at a time when I was really trying to understand specifically what was going on with athletes and why some perform better than others and why we have this challenge, especially in the culture that we're living in now. And so I discovered Dr. Amen's program and immediately knew that I wanted to be a certified brain trainer. And through what I offer my sports coaches and working with them, part of that is me equipping them so that then they know how to go out and serve our athletes. And so, welcome to the show. Please say your last name for me because I want to make sure that I'm pronouncing it properly.
Absolutely. First of all, happy birthday, Jessie. It's an honor to be here. I will give you a little trick to my last name you'll never forget after I
Okay.
tell you. And honestly, I had to learn it because I went from the maiden name Valentine, like the holiday, to my name. So it's pronounced Gustavson. It's Swedish. So think of the phrase gust of wind, and you trade the wind for the sun, Gustavson.
I
Isn't
love
that
it.
easy?
Wonderful. I love that. Gustafson. And it's pretty. It's very pretty when you say it.
Well, it took a lot of practice.
I bet. And so, Barbara, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself a little bit and tell our audience, give them your background with Dr. Amen.
Yes, and so it's actually a journey I never imagined that I would be on. Actually, I feel like I stumbled upon it, or we just kind of met at this crossroads. I was a government contractor near DC for years, and I worked on a missile program supporting Naval Air Systems Command. And honestly, it was a great job. I loved it, great pay, but a missile program, and my one of my biggest core values is peace and harmony, and it's just one of those things that you're it was a cool job. But I did that for about 11 years before I started supporting the Marine Corps. And at the time of my mother's death, I it was probably the first time I started taking a look at my life to see, did it really matter? Was I making a difference? And what I was doing, while it was a great job, it didn't give me the sense of meaning and purpose I think I was longing for.
Mm,
And I took a year off to homeschool my youngest son who was struggling in school. And I was not one of those moms who wanted to homeschool. Like I tell you, I was, digging my heels, but we were at our wits' end. But it ended up being one of the most rewarding times, just bonding with my son. Me being a struggling learner in school, I was fearful that I would mess them up. We ended up closing the learning cap for him. And I just started discovering strength and skills I didn't know I had. So I ended up taking a different direction when I did go back to work. It wasn't to the original job, but I started exploring what are my strengths, my hidden strengths that I didn't know I have. And it led me to going through a coaching certification, leadership and training certification. I did not plan to have a business. I'm a recovering type A and like to have everything laid out, but I feel like I was really drawn to that because of the community of people. And I just needed people in my life to help support me. I was also caregiving for my father, who is now in later stages of Huntington's disease.
mm,
And I didn't have boundaries. And so I just really feel like I was led to this journey. And about 5 years into the leadership training, I just felt like for myself, I was struggling with speaking. I was struggling with my memory. My anxiety was sky high. And I was really looking at my attitude, but it seemed like my confidence wasn't growing. And what I realized was perhaps there was something else going on that I didn't know. And I actually picked up the book, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, back in 2015. Very first time I heard of Dr. Amen. And in that book described some of the very symptoms I was having. And I realized that I could have been struggling with some post-traumatic disorder from some early childhood trauma, uh,
mm,
with my memory. Perhaps there was something going on I didn't know. When I was 19, I was in a riding accident where I broke my back. Even though I hit my head, I never lost consciousness, but no one ever thought
mm,
to look. But when I returned to college that year, I had extreme ringing in my ears, so foggy headed, I ended up dropping out of college. And as I got older, those symptoms not only persisted, but they got worse. So I really began wondering, what's going on here?
mm,
And two of my mentors the same year came down with life-threatening brain health issues. One had a tumor in his prefrontal cortex, the other had a life-threatening brain infection. Thankfully, they're both doing really well today. During that time, I noticed the impact it had on so many people, the organization that they led. And it occurred to me, mindset's important, but it's so important to safeguard our brain health too, because without a strong brain, we don't have a strong person, we don't have a strong organization, and we don't have a strong community, that we want. So we have that ripple effect. No matter what condition our health is, it impacts. So I began to look at my own life. What can I do for my own brain? And I decided to have it scanned back in 2017. And it revealed that there were 3 mild injuries. And for me, it was a relief because it wasn't my imagination. I was having these challenges. And I became just kind of a crazy woman and started going through my own brain rehabilitation. But it really showed me a different way of looking at mental health, mindset, relationships, living goals, decision making. And so that's kind of where it all started. And eventually, Dr. Amen and I caught up and we talked about what if there was a way that we could educate people in organizations, churches, schools, anywhere where people gather that were non clinical, and teach them in a way that we're not confusing them or fire hosing with brain health, but we're able to explain it in an easy way. Because I'll tell you, with learning challenges at school, I
mm,
my IQ, it's not way up there, but the thing is, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand how your brain operates. And there's easy ways that we can optimize it.
So there's so much here, Barbara, because, you know, I personally working with athletes, understanding, but here's what I want my audience to get here today is that we're really going to be serving everyone here with this discussion tonight, and it's such an important one because especially for those that work with athletes, I want us to really start paying attention to certain things that are happening with athletes. One of the things, and you and I have talked about this in the past, is there's a lot of athletes that are out there that are suffering in silence. They suffer from depression. They suffer from eating disorders. They suffer from anxiety. Um, I find that there's so many athletes out there that don't dare to say, I'm struggling. And it's because one, they either fear they'll be chastised or, not looked at as one of the higher performing athletes, um, or they just really beat themselves up about it internally. And so when I learned about what's a lot of, a lot of this pertains to the brain, and we tend to think that it's all exterior mindset being part of that, or how big the kid, or how strong the kid is, or how much training goes into this. But we tend to really neglect the most important, I think, organ. So, from your perspective and with your expertise, what are some of the things that we should all be doing, not just athletes, but what should we all be doing to take better care of this very important organ?
Yes, and so this is very, very basic. The first time thing, we have to care. Like, we have to come to the place where we're willing to learn about the organ, that pretty much runs the gamut of everything. Whether we have healthy habits, our brain is running that. It's like our boss. From the first
Mhm.
moment we get up, it's like dictating what we do. And if we are open, if we get curious to learn about it, that's the very first thing, is just really getting curious and becoming aware of maybe some things that might be going awry. And the way I look at it, and with brain health, because you go to a doctor's office, they're going to tell you everything that's wrong. They're not going to focus on what's going well.
Mhm.
It's easy to walk out of a doctor's office and think, I'm hopeless. There's nothing going on. But what I make a point to do, whatever appointment I have, I make sure I walk out of there, or even if there's something going on, tell me what's going right too, because I need that motivation that, there's things that I can do outside of the doctor's office to take part in the healing of my brain. And so, for one of the things that I feel is, and it is important with our mindset, is to realize if someone is suffering depression, it's not your fault. It is
Mhm.
not your fault. Sometimes we're told to think positive to a fault, and it
Mhm.
can be to our detriment. Sometimes we can't think out of our way of a situation. And just because we may be suffering depression, it may not because of our attitude or because we're so sad. There might be an underlying issue going on that we don't know about yet. And I'll never forget the time, and being a student of Dr. Amen, you probably remember this, is the story of Phineas Gage. And I learned about this in graduate school too. And it's a story that you can look up. A lot of researchers had looked at his case, but he was a railroad worker in Vermont. And this was like early 1800s. He was the leader of his group, and he was very dependable. People counted on him. And he was also in charge of taking this iron rod and tampering it into explosive to tamp it down. And one day it caught a spark and it exploded, and the spear went right through his prefrontal cortex. And amazingly, the guy survived. And
Mhm.
it was crazy. Yeah, they actually walked him into the town doctor where they pulled the rod out, and he recovered. He returned to work, but he was not Phineas Gage anymore. He swore, he caused fights, he was mean. And
Mhm.
he ended up getting fired, and he went from job to job, and eventually Barnum Circus hired him, and he died, I believe it was 11 years later. And through Amen Clinic's database of scans, which is about over 200,000, they found that you don't have to have a huge traumatic brain injury to have brain issues. They've
Mhm.
seen it in scans with people who have different types of ADD, learning issues, Lyme's disease. There are so many things that can cause brain disorders, anxiety, and that's why it's so important to really understand the root cause so that you can provide the proper treatment.
And so how do we get to the root cause? How do we help those that may be out there and listening and they're like, man, so much of this sounds like what I may be experiencing. How do we offer them help, Barbara?
That's a great question. Not everybody is able to get a scan. So many people aren't. And so for me, one of the first things I started out was finding out what my brain type is. There is such a thing. There's five main types. There's a balanced brain type, spontaneous, persistent, cautious. But that way you could really narrow down the brain system that needs to be targeted. And there's a free online assessment, brainhealthassessment.com. It's really cool. You can get the results right away, or you can reach out to Jessie. She has an evaluation, a quantitative assessment she can take you through to
Mhm.
really hone in on some of the areas to be targeted. Also, learn about basic brain function. I'm not talking about deep dive rocket science
Mhm.
stuff, but really basic. And you can go to Amen Clinic. There is a wonderful blog there, and you can literally search any brain challenge or anything you're going through. There's a wealth of information. So educate yourself, I feel like, is a very important step. Not to memorize everything, but you're going to resonate with certain things that will lead you down a path. And definitely, one of the things that I've learned, I've had some wonderful doctors in my life, but I found that functional medicine doctors really hone in on the holistic methods, finding the root cause. So perhaps looking at your doctor and researching with them to make the best decision for you. But something so basic, and we heard our mothers and grandmothers say it all the time, is drink lots of water. It really, because our brain is 80% water, 20% fat, so it needs them both. So think of your brain as um, like you've seen the inside of a watch, all these gears, running and all. That's like your brain. The different systems are like gear shifters, and sometimes they can get stuck. There's this one area called the cingulate. It's like the brain's brake pedal, and sometimes it can get stuck too active, and it comes out in the behaviors with people who are very rigid, don't have cognitive flexibility. They get really stuck on their thoughts, and we call them the super stubborn people. And I know because I have been that way. Like I used to have a really stuck cingulate, and I'm a nice person, but I just sometimes, like a bulldog, would not let go, could not see any other option. But it was because my brain couldn't. It was literally stuck in that gear. So I've learned to give myself and other people compassion because we tend to think they're just being difficult for no reason.
Yeah, and so a lot of times when I am, and now I'm going to go back to talking about athletes. What I generally will tell a lot of parents, consider things they're not doing. So consider, you know, are they getting enough hours of sleep? Right? So are they not sleeping enough? Um, you know, uh, Again, how much water are they drinking? What is their diet like? What kind of music are they listening to? Right? Because athletes tend to, they want to put those headphones on and everything's blasting all the time because that's the way they feel like they get geared up for their training or their games. And it's those small things that oftentimes we don't think about. Well, think about everything else, including, what's the mindset like, and how much, meditation are they getting, and that kind of thing. But we sometimes, really forget to look at the very small things that are making the biggest impact often. And so, if we were to, especially again with an athlete, if we were to give them some tips to help them get on a healthier course to take better care of their brains, what are some of the simple things they can start to implement?
Yeah, so often, and I'm just thinking back when I was a teenager, if my parents were to ask me to make a big change to do something, I would
Right.
probably want to do the opposite. Um, I I really love tiny steps, like not changing everything in your life, but just trying out one simple thing for 2 weeks and seeing how you do. So, try out, drinking the right amount of water and quality water for two
Mhm.
weeks, or try going to bed 20 minutes, 30 minutes earlier,
Mm.
and just notice if you have a difference in that. Try turning off the media 30
Mm.
minutes early before you go to bed, because for me, what impacts my sleep the most, I might be doing the right things for my brain, but if I'm not training my brain to shut down at night, my
Mhm.
brain thinks it's daytime, so it's not going to go to sleep. It's like, oh, let's stay up longer.
Mm.
I'm a night owl. So I have to really coax it. And there's something called brain priming. It's like getting ready to get ready to go bed. And
Mm.
it's kind of like a toddler. You have to think of a toddler, you give it a bath, read a really sweet book, just kind of calm them down. Sometimes drink warm milk, and then has a good night's sleep. We kind of have to do that with our own brain. We have to like lead it and help it understand. Otherwise, it's really going to be like a bunch of squirrels and monkeys and doing its own thing. And if we have habits that way, it's going to not want to get rid of those habits, because often we get a dopamine rush from those things, which is very motivating chemical, and it motivates us to keep going and doing things. So I just recommend just tiny, tiny incremental steps, and telling your brain, talking to your brain. That seems kind of weird, but
Wow.
there's an amazing book. You've probably read it. Your brain is always listening. So think about, we, our body, even the cells in our body and our brain recognize our own voice, our own thoughts,
Mm.
and we are either telling, thinking of what we need to do or telling it to do. And so really becoming aware of what we're saying to ourselves and deciding, does that really match the habit I want to create or the goal that I want to achieve? And often we'll find that it doesn't match. And it creates this kind of like I call it an inner rebellion in our heads. It's like a resistance that we create inside of us. And it makes it really hard to break a pattern. So, really becoming aligned, more aligned with your thoughts and your actions.
Yeah, I love that. How young should we really start teaching kids about their brains?
I don't think I mean, I think right away, and I really
Right.
believe it begins with the parents, because when
Mhm.
kids are young, especially those first years, those development years, they're soaking in everything. And
Mhm.
their brains are not fully formed. And they say until age 25, the average people, usually in females, and sad, sorry guys, older, a little
Yeah,
bit older for guys.
yeah.
Um, the science is there.
Yeah.
But I really feel like, especially those younger years, the parents modeling it first, it's going to naturally become a habit for their children.
Yeah, one of my favorite things, and I use it even for myself. They have that little, it's like a little figure. It's a brain, and he's like lifting weights. And I love that. Just looking at that motivates me to remember that this is the most important organ in my body. And I want to strengthen it just like I want to strengthen my muscle, just like I want to, go out and stimulate, my body to function. I really want to stimulate my brain the same way. I want to take care of it. I want to nurture it. I want to love on it. And I love Dr. Amen does something that is so wonderful, and I love the way he explains it. I don't think I could ever do it any justice the way he does it, but he talks about the ants
Ah,
and the ant system, and I love the way he explains that. And part of that is recognizing what is going on in our brain and how do we then, you know, empower, right? How to become our own empowerment for our own bodies and brains. Um, and one of the programs that I absolutely devoured and loved was Brain Thrive by 25. Could you talk a little bit about that?
that's one of Amen University's and Dr. Amen's and Dr. Jesse Payne's um, wonderful course for schools. It's been taught for a number of years in many school systems. They've even done a research study on that,
Mhm,
showing the impact it's had on high school students and freshmen and college. It's phenomenal. And it's such an empowering way to talk about brain health, but they really use it's really designed to help them with relationships, with their mental health, but they really kind of go in a back door. They take a heavy subject and they make it fun. There's
mhm,
activities. They're learning about their boss brain and what to do when they are faced with issues like when they're worried about taking a test or they're
mhm,
worried about being bullied. What's something that they can do and take control of their own neurology and how to advocate for themselves and how to also be the leaders in their schools, how to recognize, when somebody's nervous system may be on high alert, what can they do to step in to help and support that person? So it really is like so many things that we learn, change and transformation starts with us. And when we're able to teach that and, to students, there are future leaders. In fact, many of them are leaders now. If we can get them early on how to really start to transform and lead themselves, they're going to naturally take those and be advocates in college and their workplace when they first start out. So it's something that I wish I had at that age. I had kind of a late start. Thankfully, it's not too late, but
mhm,
it's just something that I'm very excited that we have. And right now, especially with the changes in the school system and the pressures on the teachers,
mhm,
this is a tool to really help them create a different kind of conversation around mental health. Keep doing what you're doing, but also include the brain because it's something that fits together. When you think of the brain is the house that the mind lives in.
mhm.
And once you are seeing that, it's like a whole paradigm shift. You see things differently. So you're going to try new things that get different kinds of results. And it's one of those things that it's not a quick fix. It's just not. And sadly, sometimes people try a tool and they give up. They're like, oh, this didn't work for me. But the key is, the brain through neuroplasticity, it can be repatterned and thought, but it takes repetition, it takes patience. But it's one of those things like with the ant exercise you were talking about. Once the brain gets it, it starts to see it as safe
Mm,
and it starts to want that repetition. Normally doesn't like the comfort, getting out of the comfort zone. It likes safe and predictable, even if it's not good for you. But when you introduce a new pattern and hit the repeat and keep doing it, it's going to want more of that.
and so for someone like myself who is, a woman in her, early 50s, runs a business, works with, mostly men and athletes and that kind of thing. Um, taking care of my brain is going to be very different, right, than let's say my male counterpart. Is that true?
In my opinion, it is, and here's why. First of all, 50s are fabulous. I'm in the club right with you. I say it's different because often women are the nurturers. They
Mm,
are taking care of everyone around them. And often we put ourselves last, even though we need to put on that mask first. We just are so focused on helping others that we forget to put ourselves in the equation too.
Mm.
So my what I have to do, because I still have to remind myself, even with all the tools, I have a very strong support system. And I have certain people that call me out when I don't care for myself. And the idea is choose you too. You know, it doesn't have to be either or. It's you're not dropping responsibility, but choose you too. You being at your best is it's not selfish. And if you think it is, well, it's okay to be selfish if you're taking care of yourself. I really had to almost trick my brain into realizing that self-care is really my health care. It's a non-negotiable. It's not a bubble bath. It can be, but it's important. It's I have to draw that line. And I decided, even though I'm crazy busy, I'm in grad school, I've got my own business going on too. Once a month, I get away on my own little retreat, just me, myself, and me.
I love that.
The time to renew. And it started about 8 years ago when my youngest son was going through some emotional trauma, and it was a way for me because I was in a caretaking position for him, and
Mhm.
I just had to get away. But it turned into such a renewal space, and it's always inconvenient, not easy. But I just decided to schedule it and do it, and I've never regretted it.
I love that. And you just said something, and that's why I thought I wanted to mention on the show. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free. We'll be more than happy to answer some questions here tonight. But you said something that also again resonated with me. I'm also my mom's caretaker, who's now in the beginning stages of onset dementia, and it's so hard to watch those that we love so dearly challenged with their memory. And so one of the things that I have vowed is that you know, obviously I now know that potentially, right, this is now in my bloodline. And so how do I prevent this from happening to me? And I'm sure there's others that are experiencing or going through this, and they're probably questioning the same thing. How do I prevent this from happening to me? And so thank God I have the tools that I've learned through Dr. Amen and, through the studies that we now, have with him. But one of the big things that I started to do since encountering Dr. Amen and his teachings is the supplement line. I'm really learning, well, what's good for my brain and what fits for, my need.
Yes.
And so we also have that to think about, that there's supplements that we can absolutely take to help strengthen the brain, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And with the Bright Minds teaching that you do, there's 11 risk factors, and Amen Clinic has put it in a beautiful, easy to remember way called Bright
Mhm.
Minds. It talks about blood flow,
Yeah.
retirement, aging. There's a whole list of things. And what you're teaching, Jesse, is really helping people be proactive with their brain so
Right.
it doesn't lead to certain things that we're susceptible to. Because once it's one of those things that trouble typically starts in the brain before you even start to have symptoms, which is really scary. That's why they've been able to trace people back and who have, when they were first diagnosed with Alzheimer, dementia.
Mm.
Oftentimes, when they trace back, they could have seen symptoms as early as late 20s and 30s. So the brain is really resilient, and often when it starts having symptoms, things are more progressed.
Mm.
And so it's one of those things, being proactive, again, tiny steps, because we don't want it to be a one and done thing. We want it to be lasting, and we want to be able to be there for our loved ones. And having understanding what your motivation to do this, I feel like, is another important step, because if we don't have a strong why to do it, we won't
Mhm.
follow through. Like my why, I don't have grandkids yet, but I hope to. My
Mm.
why is I want to be here and I want to play on the floor with my grandkids one
Mm.
day.
Yeah, for sure. And now I'm going to say that the counterpart to that. So the other thing we want to avoid is what I've watched sadly, too often. Um, like in my case, I want to do the right thing and take the right things to prevent that from happening. I've watched a lot of young people and athletes turn to drugs and alcohol because they're trying to calm the feelings and the thoughts and the things that they have going on, and that breaks me. And
Yeah.
so one of the biggest reasons I decided to become a certified brain trainer was specifically for that reason. How can I help more athletes accomplish learning more about their brains, how to take better care of it, how to, after they've had a concussion, my God, so many of them don't even know what are some of the symptoms that they should be looking for, or their loved ones, because what I find is that oftentimes they don't even recognize that there's certain things. um and so what are some of the things that we should be looking for that are signs?
Well, think about, I mean, even tracing back to when you're little, was there a time you fell off a bike? For me, fall off a horse,
Mhm.
fall off a ladder,
Have
go
a car
head first
accident.
or something, fall off a roof, participated in high impact sports, have had a concussion or multiple concussions, or even whiplash in a car accident. And
Mhm.
these are things that you can be knocked unconscious, but you don't have to be knocked unconscious to have a brain injury that they found.
Mhm.
And it's any of those things that we typically don't think about because we're so resilient. We tend to bounce back really quickly. So
Mhm.
really looking at your history, and for me, horse accident was one, and the other two mild injuries they found were a pattern that very easily could have been from forceps during birth. It was a common
Mhm.
pattern that they've seen, and it could have explained a lot. And when I asked my father at the time, and he said, "Yeah, you almost didn't make it." I never knew that. I was never told that. And
Mhm.
it explained some of the learning challenges that I had in school. So things I never thought about. But things like that make you more susceptible to things like Alzheimer's and dementia and other
Mhm.
related diseases. So things, again, it's really educating and asking, and looking back, could I
Mhm.
have hurt my brain and not even realizing it?
Mhm.
And sometimes it's related to a virus like
Mhm.
Lyme's disease. Some people have been misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, but when they look at the brain, it was actually Lyme's disease.
Wow.
So just knowing that things like anxiety and other disorders at a surface, it
Mm.
may look like it's being caused by one thing, but unless you look, you really wouldn't know.
Yeah, and oftentimes what I'll tell, especially the parents or the coaches, is look for certain things that are out of the norm for your athlete. So if they're
Mm,
withdrawn, if they're, if they're not really, if they're acting and their behaviors and the things that they're saying and doing are not conducive with who they generally are. Like
yes.
those are all things that we should be looking for. Those are some of the tips, the things that should be tipping us off. Is there something deeper to what's happening with them than us just thinking that they're being a brat?
Yes, or they're just being a typical teen with
Right.
hormones, and that can happen, I will tell you.
Right, right.
But sometimes I think we kind of go through it, as a mom, I go through this. Is that like typical or is that
Mhm.
something not typical? And I know with one of my sons and Amen Clinic, they've been able to subtype, a, 7 different types of ADD, and they're all a little bit different. And I have 3 of the subtypes. So some have temporal lobe issues, so you'll really see the mood swings in certain
Mm.
situations, and it can be scary, and
Mhm.
it can be easily misdiagnosed.
Mm.
And for me, I wasn't like a hyper child like out here, but inside I was very, very hyper
Mm.
and just distracted. And so there's also the worried ADD child and the sad. So they can be combinations. where the basal ganglia is affected.
Mhm.
And so really understanding, like, a mother knows their child more than anything.
Mhm. Mhm.
And when something is significantly off, it could be due to a social issue, it could be something underlying. But I think one of the most important thing is really having a connection, a bond with your child as best as you can.
Mhm.
And often, especially in certain tender years, that can be, paused or broken, but meeting them where they are, or seeing if there's somebody else that they would listen to.
Mm.
And I know that now that my kids are older, we have a different kind of relationship. They know they can come to me for anything, but there's times where they won't. And I think one of the hardest things is knowing when to allow them to walk their journey, like when they do become adults and, legally, there's a line where are we helping them or enabling them? We can
Right.
only do so much. So
Right.
when it's younger, it's certainly more easy to be a more active role in getting them the help they need.
Yeah, no, I agree. Um, Again, when I think of protecting my brain, I think there's that misconception again, mindset versus the actual organ. And so two very distinct things. And so much emphasis is always put on the mindset that we sometimes often overlook the organ itself. So as a recap, I just wanted to sort of remind those that are out there and they want to know, how do I take really good care of my brain? So some of the things we said was watch how much water you're drinking, watch, be mindful of your sleep patterns and how many hours of sleep you're getting. Um, Again, what we're eating obviously is also a big part of how we're taking care of our brains. The supplements that we're taking or not taking, and which ones should we be taking, are also a big part of this. But relationships too, right, Barbara, are really
Mhm.
important to brain
Absolutely.
function.
And longevity too. There's a really interesting study. You can Google it. It was done in the little town of Rosetta, Pennsylvania, in the 1940s.
Mm,
It was a private study, but it was funded by the government. And what they found was this little town of Rosetta was one of the healthiest towns in America.
mm,
Didn't have the heart disease or anything like that. So they went in to find out why, and they expected that it would be a town of where people would exercise, super healthy, but it was not true. Like, they drank, they smoked. But what they found was it was a little group of immigrants from Italy, and they had the strongest social connection. Like, the neighbors could count on each other for everything. They shared food. They just had this amazing relationship. And sadly, over time, they became very Americanized, and their heart disease went up.
mm,
But there's a lot of studies out there showing how much our social connections impact our health, our brain health too. And
mm.
so it's very vital that we have healthy social connections, and to really examine, who are the people around me, and do they support my habits that I'm trying to build? Because we tend to be influenced by the five closest people around us. And so looking at who might be a barrier to my success, and really taking a hard look at that. And it might require some crucial conversations and some uncomfortable decisions made, but it's really vital that we have the support that we need, especially nowadays.
And so could you just remind us again, Barbara, of the website that everyone can go to have their the brain assessment that you
Yes, brainhealthassessment.com. And what it'll do, based on your answers, it will suggest some supplementation.
Mhm.
You will probably recognize a lot of those, which are available anywhere, but Brain MD does have a line that is geared specifically towards the brain systems.
Yeah, and I certainly can provide some cool coupons for anyone that might be interested in
Yay.
those for Brain MD. And so, any last words of tips or encouragement or words of wisdom that you can share for those, not just athletes, but just are for all of us in general that are wanting to take better care of our brains?
Change again starts with us. It's one of the things that probably for me has changed my life. I know that sounds very cliche. Having Huntington's disease in our family, which typically accompanies psychotic issues, typically accompany that. I lost my sister to it earlier this year. Just really understanding how the brain impacts our habits for me has been a critical step, and it can really change the way that you view your community, including those who have made really bad decisions. And I'm not making excuses for anyone because I believe we need to hold ourselves accountable, but understanding that when we do those changes, we have an impact on those closest to us. We're not just helping ourselves, we're helping our children, our children's children. It's different generations that we can impact. And so I'm just so very honored to share this at this stage of my life.
I love it. And we're so lucky to have those of you that are wanting to learn about this. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I want to also, of course, thank Dr. Amen for the huge amount of work that he put into having more people learn about this very important organ. And so, Barbara, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight. I want to say, I hope that this has helped many of us all fall in love with our brains because they're just so magnificent and they're truly the core of everything that we do. And so, Barbara, thank you for all the knowledge that you've shared here tonight. I look forward to having you again as a guest.
Yeah.
We'll dive deeper into some of these really important issues. And so this show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out spanglishworld.ca for all the news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, live it. Make each day amazing on purpose, and remember to always stay unbeatable. I will see you next week for another edition of All Bases Covered. Have a wonderful night.